This is Queer Cinema Catchup, recap and reaction to White Lotus Season 3, Episode 5, Full Moon Party.
We will quickly recap what has happened with each of our characters, play a little White Lotus-themed game with these whiteboards, and we'll give you our thoughts on that monologue, that kiss, and what it might all be saying about queerness.
This is a recap for anyone who wants to stay checked in at the White Lotus from week to week. Just call us Armand and Valentina, because we're here to make your stay as fun as possible with as much warning about any scandals and murder as we can. So let's dive into it. Let's start with our recap. What was going on with our favorite trio of friends, Kate, Laurie, and Jacqueline?
They were out partying with the Russians.
Oh.
And who's the actor?
Which actor?
Well, who's the one?
Jacqueline.
Jacqueline. There's a really interesting part where she was dancing and there's a table of younger women, and Jacqueline was electric when she saw that they saw her on the dance floor dancing, and it just made her feel so young, which is quite a contrast to an episode or 2 episodes ago where they ended up in a pool with a bunch of older people. So it's emphasizing just how much Jacqueline is just craving this youth and trying to hang on to it. And she's hanging on pretty well. She looks incredible. They all look incredible.
They do.
Actually, I was watching, I was mesmerized. I was like, oh, Carrie Coon.
Well, they wanted you to be really interested in dancing.
And then the last woman too, the blonde-haired woman.
Laurie. No, Kate.
Kate, who
with
also,
short hair.
Yeah, Kate also looked incredible. They all looked amazing on the
great.
dance floor.
And you forgot one key detail, which is that Jacqueline's character, they're all telling Carrie she should have hooked up, Laurie/Carrie, they should have hooked up with one of the 3 men. And instead it is Jacqueline who calls Valentine back to the hotel room and hooks up with him. And I do think that's interesting that you point out the women that she was gazing at and the youth she was feeling from it and how that's maybe tied to desire. Something we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to another part of the episode. Actually, that part's coming right now because I'm going to talk to you about what was going on with Rick. And instead of him being paired with Chelsea, his girlfriend this week, he was paired with a new character played by Sam Rockwell named Frank. They meet at a restaurant and they pass a bag between them. Presumably inside the bag is a gun, and this relates to Rick's plan to confront the man who murdered his father. But what ends up transpiring between them is a very unique scene, a long monologue scene that was probably about 4 minutes, but felt, I would say, very long.
It did?
I think intentionally so. Well, I don't know. Maybe you thought it felt...
It was just one of those classic White Lotus scenes where you just have no idea that it was going to lead to that. And just, it was very, I was shocked with every turn of the reveal. And I thought it was really well done. And I was engrossed. Yes,
and Walter Goggins' character, Rick, reacts with a lot of muted shock. And I think that stands in for our own shock. But basically what happens is they're at this restaurant. Sam's character, Frank, orders a chamomile tea, which surprises Rick because they've always, whenever they've met up, they've been drunk, basically, is what I gathered. And Frank goes on to reveal that he's sober now. He's turned to Buddhism. And the reason this has happened is because when he came to Thailand for perhaps an attempt to escape the law, he did so specifically to this country because he has a proclivity for young Asian women. And he spent his time, this is not going to be PG, everybody, but he spent his time hooking up with these women. And eventually it expanded to any type of woman, any body, any person he could encounter. And then he mentions he came across, one time he was hooking up with someone who was actually transgender or...
Well, they actually call it, I'm pretty sure, please correct us if we're wrong, but I'm pretty sure in Thailand, they're called ladyboys.
Oh, okay, so that was the phrase he used, lady man.
And I think that it's a term, again, I need to look into this, I don't know where I heard this, but it's a term that's used actually by people who identify in that way.
Okay, well yes, okay, it's a common, though sometimes outdated term. But yes, you're correct. Okay, so that happens and he begins to say he's wondering about his desire and if it's truly a desire for Asian women or if it's a desire to be like these Asian women. And this goes on to result in him hiring a man who looks like him dressing up like a young Asian woman to experience that. And it continues where he then hires other women to watch them, and then he will look into their eyes to imagine that he is the girl being in this experience with someone like him or with him. Anyway, we'll come back to that later. I know that's a lot to discuss or process in the moment. What was going on with Rick's girlfriend Chelsea and the rest of the young people on the boat?
The yacht party is happening and in full swing, and they're all partying and drinking and doing drugs. Mm-hmm. But Chelsea also expresses how she feels like very concerned for Rick at all times. And then doesn't Chelsea say that she feels like it's like her son in a way, or like a child? So it's like
her friend's like, he's 50 years old.
Yeah.
But it was very endearing.
But it was like, yeah, she was very genuinely just like, I'm worried about him. Yeah.
Yeah, what struck me was that her friend and Chelsea, or Charlotte, or Chloe, I think her name's Chloe. Yeah, Chloe. She was like, responded to that, because then Amy Lou Wood's character, Chelsea, was like, I really am always worried about him, and I feel like my emotions never matter. And then her friend was like, oh, you're so beautiful. And they had this kind of moment. Mm-hmm. And at the end of their evening, they all take drugs as well, even though Saxon doesn't want to, because he's usually not someone who takes drugs, but his younger brother Lachlan goes for it anyway. And the night kind of ends with this interesting scene where they're playing a game, and the girls, Chelsea and Chloe, kiss. And then they encourage the brothers to kiss, and they kind of are making this hand motion to suggest like a peck, which they do, but then it kind of results in a makeout session.
But who's the one that initiates it more than the other?
Lachlan. So again, these are two moments I think of like desire. Just throwing that out there. What was going on with Belinda?
Belinda, I'm worried about that woman. Two big things happen in this episode with Belinda. One, she goes to who's the Armand of this hotel?
His name is Fabian.
Fabian. Belinda goes up to Fabian in a whisper, and she's like, I know the man. Out in the lobby, too. She goes out in the lobby and talks to Fabian that she knows Greg, who goes by Gary at this hotel, and she knew him at another White Lotus, and basically catching up on everything that we already know, that Greg is a dangerous person and most likely probably killed his wife. And when she reveals this to Fabian he wants her to kind of hush up and not worry about it. I forget the exact words he says.
He said that it was inappropriate. A lot of the guests at this hotel have colorful pasts, and it's not a good idea to poke at these pasts or talk about them in public spaces. And then she'll probably be fine. She'll probably survive, is what he says to her. But what else happens with Belinda later on?
And then, so this episode is the past 2 episodes, this has all been pretty much over the course of one day. So we're still now in the evening part of this one day that we've been following in these episodes. And we've been hearing this noise in Belinda's apartment, but it's always kind of a strange noise. You can never really quite identify what it is. And she brings back the White Lotus man, what's his name? Porn Chai. She brings him back, and they hear the noise again. And she's like, what is that? And he pulls back the dresser, and it's that lizard, that giant lizard that she saw earlier in the season that she was like terrified of. She starts screaming, and then he he brings it outside, and then Belinda's like, it was in here the whole time? And then Belinda asked Porn Chai to sleep over that night, and Porn Chai's like, and she's like, you can sleep on the couch, you can sleep on the other bed, or she's like, you can sleep in this bed. She's like, of course, I gotta get your consent, Do they do that here, consent? We just started doing that over in America. That's my favorite line of the episode.
And then they end up hooking up. So it's another moment of hooking up this episode. Were you surprised by that? Did you think that was gonna happen?
No.
Yeah, I was. No, you were not surprised.
I was surprised. Okay. I did not think it was going to happen. There's something about the actor who plays Belinda where she's like giving, like, it feels really friendly to me. Like, it doesn't feel like I don't know how to describe it, because even in the previous episode where like Porn Chai takes off his shirt and she's like very clearly attracted to him, I can't quite put my finger on.
It's right when you said this that I'm thinking about the themes of the episode. I think it has something to do with she's a character who, like, even her saying, you can sleep in this bed if you want, but you don't have to, but it's open, I gotta get your consent. It's sort of like there's a desire there for him to sleep with her. but she doesn't want to say it outright.
Yeah.
So I think she's kind of like unable to speak her desires into existence. And it seems like the theme of this season, even supposed to be spirituality, I think it's actually about how like our desires and how that relates to spirituality, especially through the lens of something like Buddhism, where you're supposed to separate self from attachment. So that's what I think is going on. That she can't quite
and also
articulate her desires.
They're both also people that work in hospitality, and it's almost like Belinda can't shake the hospitality out of her.
The service-oriented mindset.
Yeah.
And earlier, a lot of people online pointed out she was reading at the beach a book called What Do You Do When You're Surrounded by Narcissists? And so that's, again, the idea that she's always kind of subjected to these bigger personalities, both by nature of her line of work and perhaps other things, which maybe we'll get some more insight to when her son comes, which I think will be next episode. Okay, let us quickly, I think we can talk about Mook and Gay Talk as we talk about the Ratliffs. What was going on with the other Ratliffs, not including the two sons?
Oh, where the daughter reveals at dinner that she plans to live in Thailand for a year. Also, at the same time, her father, it could be seen as him being shell-shocked, but we know that he's in shell-shock about something else.
Yeah.
He has stolen the gun, as we saw in the previous episode, and so he's kind of like coming to grips with that. And does the man, not Mook, but...
Gay Talk.
Gay Talk, does he come to the table and questions?
He watches them and waits until Tim walks away and goes to the bathroom.
Parker Posey, when she hears the news that her daughter wants to live in Thailand, she loses it. She's so upset. And I think as crazy as Parker Posey's character is, I feel like I kind of empathize with her a bit, because it is a lot to hear that your child like wants to live in another country and explore a different religion. So I definitely got that, but then it's always funneled through her. She kind of comes up with more elaborate things that are a little out of touch. But yeah, she like brings up how like it's common with women to get like abducted and that kind of thing, and
so become sex slaves, and then
sex slaves.
It's like a cult, and then there's a really funny line about it could be like the Nexium cult, and then she said, "No, Mom, like this monk, he's written a book," and she goes, "So what? Charles Manson wrote a book. Bill Clinton wrote a book, and Hillary Clinton wrote 5 books."
That was a good line.
And then, most distressingly, Jason Isaacs' character, Tim, almost commits suicide with the gun. But Parker Posey hears him awake and comes in. She seems to be very aware that something is wrong. She even asks him, and then he doesn't go through with it. And Gay Talk, to kind of close the loop on that, approaches Tim in the bathroom and says, I'm missing something, and I think you have it. Which I thought was a very interesting...
But he's so cryptic.
...line. But, of course... Tim knows exactly what he's talking about, but he says, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, let's move on to the game portion of the day. Now, for those of you who are just joining us, what we do is
Well, this is first for this series.
Oh, you're right.
But in our separate series, we started a whiteboard game that we're now bringing on to White Lotus.
So...
Did you play this in your solo Yellow Jackets game?
No, I did not.
I didn't realize I'd say that.
So, basically, I'm going to ask a question. We're both going to write our answers, and then we're going to try and guess what the other person said. Okay, so as of right now, who do you think dies at the end of this season?
Oh my God.
That's a hard one.
Are we writing the character name or the actor?
It's okay, either way. Oh, you're writing a long name.
I know, I kind of gave it away.
Are
we guessing what the other person wrote?
Yeah, I think so. Now that you wrote such a long name.
I knew that I was going to give it away. Damn it, I should have wrote the character name.
No, I think you might be saying Parker Posey.
I just think it'd be really interesting, a death within that family and how they respond to it. Her in that dream that she has where she has like the mattress around her and she like walks out to the water. I thought that was like interesting. Armand in the first season and Jennifer Coolidge in the second season, it's like they're two characters that don't have like close ties with people, with characters within the season, right?
Yeah.
And so it would be interesting to pull someone from who has their family there, which would be very dark.
True.
Okay, can I see the list of people? Mm-hmm. Michelle Monaghan.
That would be interesting, because I love a celebrity death would make the news, which would be kind of cool. But no, I said Lachlan. And I said this because Somebody pointed out that his tile card on the opening musical intro is a person, a man lying in the water. And so we know the body's floating in the water at the end. So that's really the only reason I did it. I also think that the gun, I think Gay Talk and Tim are going to get into a confrontation over this gun. And I think it might go off accidentally, spurring a shooting spree from the other guards on site. And I could see it being very tragic if Tim's sort of financial professional downfall is specifically tied to the collateral damage of his son's death.
I can see it.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking. But I don't know. I just don't know. But moving on to the next question. Would you let Piper stay in Thailand for a year if you were Parker Posey? No, if you were her parent. Okay. Okay, what did you say?
How are you showing our answers? Or
Yeah, I'm going to guess what you said.
What did I say?
You said, based on your response, no. Based on your...
I said yes.
Oh, okay.
Why?
Because you're so empathetic to Parker Posey's point of view there. So I thought maybe you said no.
I mean, I feel like she'll get over it. It's just like a child going abroad for you. I don't see why it's a big deal, honestly.
What did I say?
Something along the lines of yes, but you wrote a lot of words.
So I said ideal me, like me as a person, me as a human unattached to a family, yes. But then I think about real me, and if I had a child, maybe I would be afraid, and I would say no.
But is it like Thailand specifically, or like...
No, it's just like,
So
what is this monastery? Like, I've heard nothing about it, you know what I mean? And why was it so secret? I'd be scared. I would need to go, like they're going to go to the monastery and ask them questions.
What if you have like a daughter that wanted to become a nun in Rome? Would you all say no to that?
I would definitely say no to that. That's an absolute no.
More so than Thailand.
Yeah, yes. That would be like, are you sure you want to do this? If you want to be a nun? I went to a Catholic all-girls school. I know what it's like to become a nun.
All right, what's next? I said my favorite's Jacqueline, and my least favorite was Fabian.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, why?
Fabian?
I mean, he was kind of a jerk.
He was being a dick. So
But
Belinda
it was
totally...
so funny. It was so funny. I know. I don't like him as a person,
it's
but
gonna have real negative consequences in the show.
Usually that whole scene cracked me up.
Yeah. It was like comical, but I also saw some real frustration in that.
I mean,
like someone like genuinely
terrified for their life.
concerned, and it's like, oh, we're gonna brush it under the rug because they're a rich person. Like that was upsetting.
Okay, and your least favorite? Oh, yours said, okay. My favorite was Belinda because she killed every scene that she was in. She was cracking me up. And I'm happy for her. Poor child, that was really sweet. My least favorite was Tim because, you know what? I'm tired of him being so mopey and monosyllabic. You know, I want him to do something. And, you know, I don't want him to kill himself. That was very distressing. But at the same time, it would have been doing something.
He was a real downer.
Last 2 episodes, he's been so...
When you're going through hardships, don't make us bored.
Entertain me. Okay. That was very insensitive and not my true feelings at all.
But Jacqueline, she was my favorite thing. She's one of my favorites actually of the show.
I agree. I enjoy her.
She just is like so fun. And then also Leslie Bibb.
Yeah.
Sam Rockwell and her are partners.
I know. I'm so glad
they got to vacation in Thailand together. That'd be so nice.
I'm so glad you said that because I think the last thing we're talking about is just a little bit more about Frank, Sam Rockwell's character's monologue and what it maybe is pointing us to with the theme of this season. So I'm just going to read very quickly a quote from the episode. Again, not PG, everybody. So he says to Rick, "What is desire? The form of this cute Asian girl. Why does it have such a grip on me? Is it because she is the opposite of me? Is she going to complete me in some way? I realized I hooked up with a million women. I'd still never be satisfied. Maybe what I really want is to see one of these Asian girls." And then later he says, "We all have our Achilles heel man. Where does it come from? Why are some of us attracted to the opposite form? And some of us the same? Sex is a poetic act. It's a metaphor. Metaphor for what? Are we our forms? Am I a middle-aged white guy on the inside too? Or inside could I be an Asian girl?"
I think that that last section of the quote that you read gets undercut by the like, could I be an Asian girl, like that is what stood out to me the most. But reading it here of like sex it's a metaphor. That's like such a interesting
Well, and
way
then
to look at it.
to add some context to that, I read a review in Variety written by Daniel Daddario, and which is interesting because in the
That
first
name
season,
sounds really
Daddario
familiar.
is the name of the woman who played the girlfriend who ends up staying with the pineapple sweet man in season 1. So I don't know if they're related or not, but that's beside the point. He said something very interesting where, of course, saying you want to be an Asian woman or you want to be somebody else is speaking to kind of, well, not the race part, but the gender part is speaking to a trans identity or a homosexual identity, and that's probably there to some extent. But Daniel's take was more about how Frank is this guy who has a lot of power as kind of this middle-aged white man who is also a threatening figure. It seems like him and Rick have used violence in the past, but what he really wants is to experience the experience of being someone who is not as powerful within a dynamic with someone like him or with him. So he wants an experience of himself. He wants the experience of, to be more vulgar, like penetration, but not in not such a physical sense. Like really, it's more, so there's like the idea that he's kind of thinking through the metaphor of power and where he stands in relation to it and wanting to flip that on its head, even though he's the one paying all these people to do these things.
Yeah.
So he still has all the power.
Yeah.
Which is really fascinating.
It's really fascinating. Yeah, I do think, yeah, you have to like look beyond, because like, yeah, I do get hung up on like, I want to be an Asian girl thing, kind of like destroys the whole metaphor of it. But yeah, it's like, want to experience it from a different perspective, I think is really interesting, and wanting to kind of like let go of yourself and experience it from a different point of view.
Letting go of yourself, which is, if you look at all, there's a lot of sex in this episode, a lot of hooking up. We look at Jacqueline, you mentioned that she sees the young women in the bar, and at the end she ends up hooking up with Valentine. It's like she is trying to be those girls who are watching her, but what was desirable to her about this experience is that those other girls recognized her as young, so there's something queer about that.
Right.
Then we have the brothers kissing, right? And they're obviously of the same gender. Lachlan clearly looks up to Saxon, clearly needs someone to tell him how to be a man in this world. And so maybe that's what's kind of fueling this attraction. That's what's going on. What do you think about that?
Yeah, but my only confusion with Lachlan and Saxon is it really seems like when it comes, like Saxon seemed to be much more not guarded this episode, but was like, don't drink too much, don't do those drugs. Like, and then Lachlan just seemed to be open to just like let go and let loose. And so I think it's like a really interesting character development of Saxon, who we've seen, I mean, just be so like overly sexual in a non-consenting way with a lot of people. And so I really think it's interesting seeing them kind of switch. And then in terms of queerness and how Lachlan sees, it's not that it's like his brother that he's attracted to, but it's more like the like male form, and it is even attraction in a sexual sense. It's an attraction of what you were saying of like looking up like looking up to being a man. Yeah.
Which I mean, I personally think Saxon's a terrible example, but his brother, he's a big personality and he wants Lachlan to become the right kind of man, and that kind of attention I think is really, maybe he doesn't feel like he gets that from his parents. Lachlan. Unclear. Yeah, and then I don't really know how to interpret this through the lens of like Belinda and Pornchai hooking up, but I feel like there's something, I guess it's the thing about what I said about Belinda maybe not being able to state her desire so explicitly, but I'm not sure. If anyone has any thoughts about that, I'd love to hear. And then for Piper, because at the end of Frank's monologue, he says, "This is why I became a Buddhist, because I need to step away from the drugs and the girls and trying to like hook up my way to the answer of who I am on the inside, and instead negate this, detach from myself, detach my spirit from my form, and get off the never-ending carnival of lust and suffering." And then we have Piper, who is deciding to like step away from society, all the values her parents have given her, to spend this year in the monastery. We've heard Saxon say she's never had sex. We don't know if that's true. But there's just something about her divorcing herself from the kind of more desire-driven life of her family, which is really interesting.
Wasn't there a line too where Piper's like, I want values. And then Parker Posey's like, we gave you values.
He's like, what's all the values we gave you?
And then she's like, yeah, that's the point. I want to get rid of those ones.
Yeah, which is really, like, I don't know, it really struck me in an interesting way. And there was something else about Piper, Parker Posey, the dad. I don't know. It flew out of my head. Oh, I know. It was that Parker Posey then says, you want to be a Buddhist, you'll never be a Buddhist. Sure, you can be interested in this stuff, but you are not from here. This is not who you are, which again speaks directly back.
Yeah, wow. And desire and like,
who you are on the inside,
and looking at yourself from a
change
different,
it?
yeah. Wow, yeah.
So I don't really know what to make of all of this, but I just feel like it kind of, even though we've been saying that we feel this season's like slower and maybe not as propulsive as the other seasons, this kind of made me think like thematically it might be doing something much more ambitious, which makes me like it more as we talk about it.
Yeah, and then the fact that this is called Moon Party also, I'm sure there's something to the, I don't know, I think of like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, like, you know, how we see like the different versions of ourselves, or this, it's not even versions, like the, like trying to have like a completely different experience outside of yourself.
Because we're always trying to escape ourselves and the suffering that it brings.
The lust and suffering.
Wow.
And sometimes desire isn't in a sexual nature too, and I think it's doing a really good job.
And look at Tim, like desire for money and success and a certain image leading to ruin.
And look where it gets you.
Do you think there's going to be like an ironic, this is not at all related to what we're talking about, but an ironic twist where actually Tim is not going to be convicted of any crime?
But because of this death that involves the guy. But yeah.
I feel like that might happen.
Maybe.
Anyway, you guys, this has been Queer Cinema Catchup's recap and reaction to White Lotus Season 3, Episode 5, Moon Party. Please tune in next week for our recap and review of Season 6 and check out our other videos on Severance, Yellow Jackets, our main podcast, which is about a different film or TV show or miscellaneous topic each week, all through Queer Lens. I'm Allison.
And I'm Joe.
Please subscribe. Thanks. Bye.
Okay.
Interesting. That was really interesting.
Yeah.
I love when things come together in real time.